Hi, my name is Tony Higgins. I'm a record collector, curator, writer, archivist, radio presenter, international gigolo. One of those isn't true, by the way. And today I'm here at the great Love Supreme Festival with the Everything Jazz crew. Here to talk about the British jazz explosion, some upcoming releases. It's a fantastic vibe. I'm looking forward to it. So British Jazz Explosion is a reissue series coming from Decca Universal, which digs deep into the archive of Decca Records, Fontana, Argo, Philips, and Decca, looking at British jazz from the 1960s and early to mid 70s, which was a real amazing period of transformation and progression in British jazz. And the series is reissuing key records on vinyl, reproducing the original artwork, remastered at Gearbox Studios to the highest precision on vintage gear. It's a fantastic project, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. British jazz during the 1960s through to the early 70s underwent a profound transformation. Modern British jazz, which began really just after the war in the late 40s, largely copied American jazz, which is fair enough. Most jazz players in Europe did copy the American greats. But by the early to mid 60s, British and British-based composers and musicians realized that simply copying the styles of the Americans wasn't enough. They had to bring their own identity and flavor to it. So composers like Michael Garrick and Ian Carr and Stan Tracy started to address the music from a slightly different perspective. Michael Garrick, the great composer and pianist, told me that, he's from Enfield. He wasn't from Chicago. So there was no point in him trying to write like someone from America. He wrote from someone who came from England. So he started to infuse elements of British folk music, even church music, into his music to create a very distinctive sound. Another artist like Stan Tracy on his very famous landmark album, Under Milk Wood, used British themes of poetry and artistry and creativity to kind of encapsulate a new feeling that was happening at the time. And I think the music created in that period was moving away from a strictly American model to a much more distinctive British sound. And even musicians like Joe Harriott from the West Indies, who was based in Britain. I mean, he basically created the European free jazz movement, free improvisation, around the same time as Ornette Coleman was doing it in America, but completely independently, unknowingly. He didn't know what Coleman was doing at that time, and nor did Coleman knew what Joe Harriott was doing. So there's been a big reappraisal in the last 20 odd years about that period of music. Most of those records that came out in the 60s and early 70s were not reissued for a long, long time. So they became very collectible, very rare, and sadly quite expensive to find. So in the last 20 odd years or so, reissues such as the British Jazz Explosion have done a really important job in shining a light on that whole stable of British composers and exactly what they were doing. And British Jazz Explosion, the latest iteration of that, and I think the best iteration of that, we've gone back to the source material where possible, the master tapes. We're using Gearbox Studio, authentic vintage gear of the period. So we're trying to keep it as authentic as possible. And the sound is fantastic. Great sleeve notes, written by me. I would say that, wouldn't I? Reproduced artwork. It's a great package for any jazz lover. The British Jazz Explosion started about 6 or 7 years ago. It began with an amazing collection of Tubby Hayes albums. Here we go there. It's complete Fontana recordings. Brilliant. I mean, he's a classic example of British hard bop, one of the biggest figures in British jazz of that period. But we've gone through, I did a compilation here, Journeys in Modern Jazz Britain, which kind of encapsulates the whole period. New Jazz Orchestra, Kenny Wheeler, Don Rendell, there's Harry Beckett, John Sermon, Joe Harriott, another Tubby Hayes, John Cameron, all killer records, which brings us to the newest in the series, Mike Taylor. Very interesting figure. So Mike Taylor was an amazingly talented British composer and pianist. Sadly, he died very young at 29. His body found washed up in Leon Sea in 1969. But in his short life, he recorded 2 amazing albums. The first one was this, Pendulum, recorded at the very famed Lansdowne Studios in London. The second was this, Trio, again at Lansdowne. Now, both of these records, when they came out, sold very poorly, even though they're brilliant. And they feature some of Britain's top jazz players, like John Heisman on the drums, for example, and even Jack Bruce from Cream on this record. In fact, Mike Taylor co-wrote some Cream tracks, interestingly enough. Sadly, Mike Taylor, despite his amazing talent, suffered from mental illness. He was an avid user of marijuana and LSD. Sadly, his mental state declined to such an extent that he just couldn't perform anymore. But these 2 records, they became collector's pieces, incredibly rare. And this is the first vinyl reissue of both of these since these were originally issued back in the 60s. Again, remastered at Gearbox Records on authentic cutting lathes and tape machines. They sound absolutely amazing. They come with sleeve notes, here we go, by yours truly. Both sets there. Original artwork, all reproduction, fantastic. So I've been a big evangelist for Mike Taylor for many, many years. And I used to call him the Nick Drake of British jazz, mainly because he died very young. In his lifetime, he sold very few records. The parallels between him and Nick Drake are really weird, actually. Both had, you know, comfortable middle-class upbringings. They wanted fame, but hated sort of being in the spotlight and doing promotion. Avid drug users, sadly died very young. So the parallels are there. And I think anyone listening to these records now today, they don't sound dated. They sound very contemporary. For example, Taylor's original compositions are fascinating in the way that they're structured and the way that he moves across the keyboard. He also is a great interpreter of other people's tracks. There's some amazing versions here, for example, of A Night in Tunisia, which is extraordinary deconstruction of the Dizzy Gillespie classic. So I think here we are in 2025 with an amazing resurgence of British jazz, incredible talent around the world. But that line from today goes back through generations, back to people like Mike Taylor. And you can draw that line, it's definitely there. And I think, hopefully, the new generation of British jazz players will listen to these records and detect something in there that they can link to and identify with. So there's more to come from British Jazz Explosion. Stay tuned, we've got some amazing projects, some incredible material from Decca, from Argo, from Lansdowne, from Phillips, from all those amazing British jazz labels in the 60s and 70s. Stay tuned. Thanks for your support so far and keep everything jazz.